here to discuss his concerns of the use of drones over American soil is Senator Sean Nienow. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Senator, you've drafted legislation addressing your concerns, but before we even get into that, why don't you explain how drones are used and why it's caused some red flags for you?
Well, right now, the technically only legally approved use would be government agencies. However, the FAA, there was a federal law passed a couple of years ago that requires the FAA to set up training sites. We've just had one approved in, I think, North Dakota or South Dakota. And they are going to set up rules for commercial use. So that is coming in the next couple of years. But this legislation that I drafted is specifically towards governmental use. Now, the state of Minnesota has contracted with federal agencies to use their drones. We presume mostly for border patrol, but we're not entirely sure exactly what the uses were for. But they have been used in Minnesota by governmental agencies.
And that probably comes as a surprise to a lot of people. So let's talk about your bill. As it's currently written, it prohibits law enforcement agencies from using drones to gather evidence in certain circumstances. What are the circumstances?
Well, basically what we don't want government to do is go on fishing expeditions. To use a practical example that you and I and the viewers would understand, an officer can't just go sit at your patio table in your backyard to see if maybe you might do something illegal. What this bill says is you can't do the equivalent of that with a drone and just fly over Woodbury looking for people doing things that are wrong. That's just not what we want government doing. Now, if government is, when I say government, the police force probably. If the Woodbury police are chasing a drug dealer and he cuts through somebody's backyard, that's fine. Now we can use a drone, fly overhead, see where the guy's hiding in the backyard, find the guy, go get him. But we don't want to go, we don't want the police, law enforcement, to just go on fishing expeditions, peering in your backyard, looking in your windows, etc. This is an up-and-coming issue in the commercial arena, absolutely. Right now, real estate agents are using them to provide aerial views of homes, and that's fine. But there is no real legal parameter on that, and that's something that we're going to have to look at as well. But right now, we're just trying to take a look at governmental use.
And you're trying to set some boundaries, as I understand. So how do you envision the local governments working with the state, working with the feds on something like this? It just seems like it might get pretty convoluted.
Well, right now, mostly the drones that are available are at the federal level. So the state or the Hennepin County or Ramsey County will contract with them but the technology is such that are getting more and more. You see the quadcopters, the 4 helicopter rotors on a little teeny drone that's maybe 1/4 the size of this table. Those are becoming very, very affordable, and the video technology is so good that you can zoom in from a long distance, and so it's becoming much easier, much more affordable for local governments to use, and they don't have to coordinate. The city of Woodbury could buy its own drone, spend $1,000, and go do what it wants to do. I'm not picking on Woodbury, but it's just what comes to mind.
Understood. So your proposal does allow for some exceptions, and you discussed a few of those. Do you see those exceptions broadening as circumstances arise? Is there some leeway for that?
Well, as with every piece of legislation, you can find out that, oh, we didn't accommodate for A, B, or C. And if something like that comes up, absolutely, that's something to talk about. The exceptions are, quite frankly, fairly broad in the bill right now, so I don't think that you'd run into those pinch points. But if you do, I mean, that's what we have to do as legislators, is take a look at, is this law applying the way that we need it to?
Let's talk a little bit about the process now. And you do have a Democrat signed on. Senator Tomassoni is signed on with one of your pieces, and you have a clone drone bill to use.
Drone clone, yes.
Yes, which has Representative Phyllis Kahn, also a DFLer. She has signed on as chief author in the House. So how do you see this navigating its way through next session? And it's been referred to judiciary. Has there been a hearing? What are you understanding from people?
We didn't have a hearing last year. As we're coming up, we're getting closer to the session now, so I'll start having some communication with the chair over there in the Judiciary Committee about when we might be able to have a hearing and getting things set up, and obviously need to work through it in the House as well with my House author. It very much is a nonpartisan issue. There is interest. I can tell you I've had legislators out of Minneapolis and St. Paul and the Iron Range, obviously with Senator Tomassoni, who have all come to me and said, hey, what are we going to do with this drone legislation? We need to get our hands around this issue. And clearly there's a number of GOP legislators, Republicans, that are interested and have signed on as well. It's not a partisan issue. It's just one of those things that people realize is an up-and-coming issue and has to do with individual privacy rights, and it cuts across any kind of party line.
Any pushback from local law enforcement? They might want the leeway to do a phishing expedition.
Not really a whole lot of pushback. My House author of one of the bills, the GOP author in the House, is a retired sheriff's deputy, and he's been talking to law enforcement, and they're actually expressing a little bit of interest in doing something with this. I haven't talked to them, but I think their logic is they would like to set some general parameters before some rogue law enforcement officer goes on a fishing expedition, takes pictures of somebody they shouldn't, and it all hits the news, and suddenly the legislature has a knee-jerk reaction. Not that we would ever do that, yeah. So I think maybe that's kind of their self-interest there, in that they realize, right, we want to use this for legitimate purposes, but we should have some parameters before we end up getting parameters that are much more tighter than they would have liked, simply because some bad things happened.
So are you feeling pretty optimistic going into the 2014 session?
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I think, there's no real pushback yet. Who knows once you get a hearing. There's no real pushback yet, and there's bipartisan support, and everybody, there's a few people that have said, some legislators that have said, well, we don't need this. Law enforcement and governmental agencies can self-regulate and take care of the problem. But most people realize, yeah, we should have some parameters. And that seems to be the consensus when I'm talking to people.
Okay, interesting piece of legislation, and we'll certainly follow it. Thank you for coming in and enlightening us on the issue. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.